Good evening. I'm Robert Kesten, Executive Director of the Stonewall National Museum, Archives, and Library. And here at Stonewall, we are working on any number of things. Our main exhibit that's up right now is called Stonewall in Stonewall, which is a recreation of the Stonewall Bar as it would have looked on June 28th, 1969, in the early hours of the morning before the police marched in. So it creates a real dichotomy with what's going on in our world today. We think that we've made progress, and yet every now and then, or pretty much every day, we're confronted with the realities that there are those that really do not respect other human beings. And so that is something that we contend with. And being that we're based in Florida, our budgets were slashed by the state just recently. And this is something that we are contending with. How are we going to survive? How are we going to prosper? How are we going to continue to follow through on our mission of collecting, preserving, and protecting the materials from the LGBTQ community, both history and culture, when we are being denied resources that are given to many, many other groups doing similar work and different work? On June 29th, we will be hosting the world's first reenactment of the Stonewall Uprising here in Fort Lauderdale. Stonewall, as you all know, was a protest, and this one will be no different. Although, ironically, we are not protesting the police because our police chief in Fort Lauderdale is a gay man, our mayor is a gay man, and so the police drive around in rainbow-colored cars. And so there is not the animosity between the police in Broward County, or much of Broward County, and the LGBTQ plus community. But there is still growing friction and great friction between the community and lawmakers and the governor in Tallahassee, simply because we are targeted by them on a regular basis, and targeted specifically is the trans community, which is a vital and integral part of the LGBTQ community. So taking into account that we represent a community that is found in every other community, they are trying desperately, the power brokers that be, to divide us so that they can conquer. And that was evident by certain groups getting state aid, other groups not, making those who received state aid reluctant to criticize the government that denied it to others. Those divisions will be hard to overcome, and they will be hard to justify as things go from one space to another. We all have to find ways to stick together, to fight this uniformly. Without that, we lose our strength, we lose our purpose, and in some sense, we lose our moral underpinnings. With that in mind, from 1979 to 1986, our guest, Nicholas Blair, a photographer who lived in both California and New York, and lives in New York now, took pictures. The book is called Castro to Christopher, Gay Streets of America, 1979 to 1986. It will look backward, I think, but this is the book. It is available, and it is really quite powerful. It captures a moment in time post Stonewall, to the beginning of the AIDS crisis. It was a time of great liberation. It was a time of a feeling of great freedom, especially if you were in a major city, especially if you were in a major city that had a large gay population. It was in those days very much a white gay world, although there are pictures of lesbians and there are pictures of people of color on the streets of Christopher Street and Castro Street. Back then, it was largely white and gay, and very much proud of the accomplishments that were taking place. So, Nicholas, you are a straight, cisgendered married man who spent years photographing members of the LGBTQ community, not only in San Francisco, not only in New York, but Fire Island, Provincetown, and elsewhere. So, what was the catalyst that brought you into those communities to take these extraordinary pictures? And I have to ask, did Ad Reinhardt ever get his camera back?
Eventually Ad Reinhardt did get his camera back. But unfortunately he had passed, so it went to his daughter, but it was instrumental in getting me started as a photographer. And it was a little Leica. And Leicas are still kind of king of the road for that kind of work that I was doing, street photography work, because they're very small. They have a little lens, and they're relatively unobtrusive, and they don't make a large click, and the shutter doesn't, whatever, wake somebody or draw attention to yourself. So as we were talking a little bit before we started recording, I was in San Francisco in 1975. I was living in a hippie commune, perhaps one of the last hippie communes in San Francisco, as the hippie thing was kind of going down the tubes and becoming a little degenerate. And there was a little bit of an overlap with the gay community. For example, we might go to a smoke-in, and the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, I think that's when I first saw them, were there, and or if we went to a gay beach, a nude beach, quite a few of the people there would have been gay, or events in Castro Street. But it wasn't really until 1978 I'd been traveling around Europe. And first, a couple of things happened. I stopped at the Dachau concentration camp because I wanted to see what concentration camps were like. My mother was actually a Holocaust survivor from Lodz, Poland, who had spent time in Auschwitz and a couple other camps. And it wasn't lost on me that even before the Jews were rounded up, gay men, along with other, politicals, were rounded up into Dachau. And then when I came back in the fall of 1978 to San Francisco, it was 2 weeks later that Harvey Milk and Mayor Moscone were brutally murdered. And this was a little bit of a shock because I had always thought that San Francisco was like a free-for-all kind of place, do what you want. We all had long hair, and it was like, be who you want to be. And but this was a big wake-up call to people outside the gay community as well as within the gay community. And I started to go down to photograph and support some of the demonstrations that were going on there. And I was really amazed at what I saw. Initially, there was a lot of confrontations with the police, but I think after things settled down, it was a detente, and Castro Street really became a very lively community, people being who they want to be. People were coming from all over the country to be there. You never knew what might be happening. Could be one day you go down, there's like a transvestite tricycle race, or these were things that were not happening in other parts of the city. And I had photographed all over the city and up and down the California coast. So I was just naturally drawn there as something that this was like a cultural revolution happening in my backyard. So I just started to spend, my spare time down there, and then I would. I say down there because it wasn't really down there. It was like across town. But then when I come back to New York City to see my family, of course, I wanted to check out what was going down on Christopher Street. And Christopher Street had this amazing pier with just beautiful light. There were other people there that weren't gay, but of course it was a big gay hangout. And it was also great photographing, but a different kind of culture, East Coast to West Coast. And then my brother, who had been traveling and living in Brazil for a few years, was back in San Francisco, and he was actually writing for The Advocate. He had written one piece about the gays of Nicaragua, and then he wrote another piece about Tobias Schneebaum, who was fascinating. I don't know if you've read any of his books, but he's a fascinating anthropologist who lived with different tribes that were, I'd say they're gay, but they're really bi because they're women, they have children, but both in the Sebeg River, which is in New Guinea, but also in Brazil. And he was fascinated, and it's a great read. Keep the River on Your Right, if anybody wants to read a fantastic book. And my brother wrote a long article about him, and my brother was looking at some of my photographs. He said, well, why don't you just send some into the Advocate? Maybe they'll be interested, because I was a sort of a starving artist, we were painting houses to make money, and but doing very little, if any, commercial photography. And I sent them to the Advocate, and they said, wow, these are great. We'll run a spread. So they ran a portfolio. And then he was also, I can't remember the exact details, but I got connected with Gay Hebdo Pie, also the French monthly or weekly, which I think is online now. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they were interested as well. And then I walked into the office of the Bay Area Reporter, BAR, in San Francisco, and just brought a stack of photographs to show them. And it was a very small office, and an editor looked at them and said, okay, these are great. We want to give you a weekly photo column, and what do you want to call it? And I said, we'll have it from Castro Street. And so that's really when the project started a little bit more in earnest, in terms of trying to capture the different events that were going on. I mean, I was always still, when I could, go to Pride. Before that, I had already photographed there, but this gave me a little more agency to go to some places like Provincetown or Fire Island when I was back in New York, and to really try to cover it, because I felt like I had a viewership. And that went on really. It was mostly in the early '80s, and then by about 1985, I was starting to get some other commercial work, working in with documentary film group, going to Ethiopia. We went when there was the famine there. This was for CARE, the Relief and Development Agency. So that's when things sort of just started to sort of phase out. But that's sort of the long story of how I got involved.
Well, it's interesting that it phased out when AIDS really kicked up.
It was, I guess I am, when I look at my photographs, I may be a little bit of an anomaly, because I tend to go for the more celebratory things. And it's, of course, going to Ethiopia and photographing a famine was not at all celebratory. And I still have trouble even looking at any of those pictures, because they're so horrifying. But what really drew me into the photographing in the community was that it was sort of like champagne. A bottle was opened, and it was a real celebration. And people, at least in these areas, I really can't speak for the rest of the country, and I'm sure there was a reason why so many people were coming to San Francisco from all over. But it was a very festive, open time, and it was just really great to be there, and to witness that, and be able to be part of it, at least as a person, visiting the neighborhood.
So, in a lot of your work, I guess almost all your work as a photographer, you're an observer, not necessarily a participant. And that gives you certainly an advantage in a way, because you get to see things hopefully with a more objective eye. What were the differences between Castro Street and Christopher Street?
Well, I think so much of it is really sort of, East Coast, West Coast. I mean, the East Coast is just more gritty, and things seem, dirtier. And I mean, certainly that the pier, if you look at pictures of that, that wouldn't be allowed now. It was just like falling apart, and people could be out there, sunbathing nude. San Francisco just had a much more, and this is a generalizations too, but if you see it in the parade shots, New York seemed more political. Mayor Koch was actually leading the parade. It ended up with a sit-in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral. So that was a little bit of a different overtone than San Francisco, which was really more celebratory, I think, and fun. And even if you go out comparing, if you want to compare the pier to the nude beaches of San Francisco, I mean, the beaches of San Francisco are beautiful, and you can just take a bus out there. It's almost like going to Fire Island. So there's always been a big cultural difference, and I think it spread into the gay community as well. That's just people in general that
But in both cases, people came to LGBTQ people and came to both New York and San Francisco from all over the country, and in some cases all over the world, to play a place or places where they thought they would be safer and more comfortable being themselves.
absolutely.
So I guess people may have chose for the same reasons that you're suggesting those differences existed. And it also, I imagine, to some extent, depended on what they thought of doing for the rest of their lives, if they ever thought that far.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. I don't know so much about the history of New York City, but I do know that San Francisco has been a bit of a gay enclave for a long time. And it was interesting to read the Queer History of America. They go over some of these facts. For example, when gold was first found in San Francisco, the ratio of men to women, I think they said it was like 24,000. When the population hit 24,000 men, there were only 400 women. So it was very common to have cross-dressing balls, and it was, so I think if you, not to say, and no one really knows exactly who is, even with a lot of American writers, Walt Whitman, exactly, they don't really talk about their sexuality per se, but I think if you were a gay person and you're going to a cross-dressing ball, you would feel more comfortable being a little bit more yourself than you would just going to kind of a straight affair. And San Francisco also became, of course, a beatnik center. And I mean, you were asking me earlier about being in, my view sort of how I got involved with the gay world, but Allen Ginsberg, it was just considered normal. It wasn't like an oddity or a difference or something. It was just kind of a normal. William Burroughs, we love Burroughs. I saw Burroughs at that time. So I guess San Francisco appeared to me to be more sort of rooted in sort of a gay culture, when New York, it was maybe an area, I mean, that was swallowed up in a bigger city.
That's interesting. I mean, Ginsburg certainly went back and forth, ultimately living
Oh,
in New
that's
York.
true. I mean, he was definitely back, and he went back and forth. I wasn't thinking so much of him being specific to San Francisco. Actually, I think of him as New York, because of course he went to Columbia, and that's where I grew up, in that neighborhood, to going to the West End as well. Although I never did. I was too young to have met him.
But no, I think that there were a lot of things that crossed paths. New York had not Woody, Andy Warhol, and
Oh yeah.
a whole array of other things. So it's interesting. That's why I'm saying your perception of being just outside the community and looking in might be a different perception than people who were uh, submerged in the community, whether they were in New York, because I think that people felt pretty comfortable and safe in the village, as they did in San Francisco. But people came to New York usually with ambition. Whereas I don't know if they went to San Francisco. They went to Los Angeles because they wanted to get into the movie business or television.
Right.
San Francisco didn't have wasn't a one industry town. And so I wonder if that drove different kinds of people to different places. West Hollywood was vastly different than Castro Street.
Right, right. I don't know. And also, I mean, the evolution in San Francisco of the sort of Castro clone, and the different um, outfits that people got into, the different dress codes. Is that where that all came from? I mean, it's referred to as sort of the Castro clone, but did that all originate out of San Francisco? I'm not. I really
Well,
don't know. Okay.
Levi's are a California company. And to some extent that was there. And certainly Levi's took advantage of what was it, the 601s, I forget what the name of the pants were with the button front, and it became part of their advertising strategy and everything. So it did become that, but that Castro clone was everywhere, just like other elements of the dress code were everywhere. So it is interesting, but I think there was also a lot of cross-pollination of people going from one community to another. You want to show some of the pictures?
Sure, that would be wonderful. Let's see here. I can. Okay, I'm gonna just go back to this, the first one. Okay, so this is one of the early pictures that was, when there was still a little bit of friction with police was going on. This was on Castro Street. But I think things had already calmed down to a certain degree. And one thing I like about photography is it's specific, but it's not specific. So we know this guy's getting led away, but we don't know exactly what is going on, why the person is pointing, who this guy is with a loose, fitting tie, and what's going on. Everybody in the background seems fairly, calm and observant. But that is one thing that I am fascinated with in photography in general.
And the police didn't seem concerned about the crowd. So
Yeah, it just sort of, it's exactly. And that's one reason I don't put specific captions on the photographs, because first of all, I don't know exactly what was going on, but I also want the view just be immersed in this moment, which in some cases is ambiguous.
and the next one, yes.
So this is one reason that I was very drawn to photographing on Castro Street. It just, you just didn't know what would happen. You could it was just much more interesting, fun, exciting, camp than other parts of the city. So it was not well before any of my work got picked up with the Advocate or BAR. It was just someplace that I would go to, and I would spend a lot of time photographing on the streets all over the city, but it just was like a magnet that was just sort of pulling me in.
Well, did you have a relationship with Haight Ashbury?
It's not much because at that point, Haight-Ashbury had become pretty seedy, and I think that was also one of the reasons that a lot of people migrated from the gay community from Haight-Ashbury, because there are not very many pictures in the book of before 1979, but I do have other pictures when I was photographing on Castro Street, and you can see there's a certain overlap between the hippie thing. So before this cloning and the different, outfits and costumes were adopted, you could see it was sort of like hippie plus, hippie with more earrings or some makeup. And I just was noticing that actually after I had done the book, or I may have included a few in there because I've been going through my archives, and I do have close to 5,000 rolls of film that I was revisiting. And once I got started on the book, I wasn't as specific about photographing there before 1979. So I had to really search through a lot of material, but all of a sudden, oh, I'm down in the Castro. Oh, there's a fair going on, or some sort of street fair or something. And you could see and look that it is much more of a hippie thing, but it looks like, there's a gay flavor to it as well. So in 1978, I was actually out of the country for almost the entire year. I'd gone to India to photograph for a while, and it was part of our commune had the gallery, and I was collecting some art and handicrafts for the gallery, and that's when I went through Europe and went to Dachau and then came back. So I was really gone for about a year, and in that time, I think there was a noticeable change. Just from looking at my photographs, it's not a scientifically researched or anything, but just going through the contact sheets, and I see the earlier work that could have been in 1977 or 76. It's much more of kind of a hippie flavor. And then by 1979, it's all of a sudden you see more of the cloning and the different looks that were going on.
So it went from gays in a less protective time period being able to cover their tracks, so to speak, living in a hippie world and having a little bit of more freedom. And then as that freedom expanded, able to create a community unto themselves.
That could be correct. I mean, I do believe that there was a migration. It's about 15 blocks, if I'm not mistaken, from Haight-Ashbury down to the Castro, and the Haight. I was doing the hippie thing. You're going to see at the very end. There's a picture of me from the time I threw that in. I thought it would be fun, but if it was seedy down there, and people were just becoming very degenerate. With drugs or whatever, and so there was a migration out of that area, and then it really became a specific, much more specifically gay community. But that said, in our commune, we had different artists who stayed and lived with us for periods of time who were gay, and I never felt, as I was saying this earlier, it was never unusual, or it was even to be commented upon. Just that's, and we basically felt that there were no rules in our commune. And as the hippie thing was just do what you want. So whatever you want to do, that was your business. And there was really
So it's
the
it's
only
not
rule we
so
really had no judgment.
no, it's just it's not so dissimilar from Greenwich Village was where the hippies were, and West Village eventually became the gay community. And that's only a few blocks away as well. So there are some unique similarities when those two different civilizations shared space, and one died out, so to speak, and the other one became surged forward.
It flourished, yes, flourished until sadly the AIDS came upon it. Um, this is another scene on Castro Street, just people hanging out. Um, there was a lot of style. There was a lot of style.
Yes.
This is Jim Farber, who I have to always thank for writing such a wonderful introduction to the book. Commented on this image, which was the first image in the book, because it really showed people hanging out and cruising. And it was interesting from a photographic point of view. We're doing something totally different, but we are both looking around. And part of my photographic practice is being aware, being in the moment, and observing. And this is a lot of what's going on as well with many of the people on the street for different reasons, perhaps. And even though as a photographer, you like to think that you are invisible and just sort of blending in, I'm sure I'm 6'5" now. I'm only 6'4" probably, but I stand out, and they're really, there's only a few streets. I mean, you'd walk around and you'd see some of the same people. Actually, there's a couple people are in the book twice. So I'm sure I was very observed, and nobody really objected to the photographing at all. In fact, in many cases, they wanted to be photographed, but that was not really my style. I don't think any of those photographs actually made it in the book, but I also love the humor. If you can see the T-shirt, it says Vidi Vici Veni, which is a takeoff on I saw, I came, I conquered. It's I came. No, it's I saw, I conquered, I came. So this is, it's great.
Sense of humor is always welcome.
Yes. I will say that, looking at other, photographers' work like Mapplethorpe or Alvin Beltrop, who photographed the pier extensively. They really mostly, photographed men, and the men were just out in much they were just much more visible. They were just much more out and dominating the landscape, you might say. But I think this is one change that also happened when I started photographing for some of the papers like the BAR. In specific, is trying to be aware of what was going on with the women. And they didn't have as much of a kind of a, the cloning thing going on, or it wasn't as obvious. But I do think that I'm glad I did that, and just tried specifically to be aware of what was going on with them as well. And I think it is a little unique. And I think if I did the book again, I would include a few more pictures um, from the woman as well. This, of course, is the famous Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, who were just a fantastic group, and so politically active, but again, so humorous. And this is in the San Francisco Pride.
Yes, and it's so interesting because we're in the 55th anniversary year of Stonewall, which means the 54th anniversary of the first Pride. And Pride has changed dramatically over the years.
It's crazy.
In terms of commercialism, in terms of the way people celebrate versus how people were celebrated. Celebrating the overcoming of things is vastly different than celebrating, an artificial culture. So it's interesting because this is still early enough that the politics, the comedy, the sense of adventure, because everything is still new, is very much visible in this picture.
It's just unbelievable.
It's just
have seen the prides. I like the Harlem Pride, which is very small, and you can kind of mingle, because the police presence gets so intense. And even when it's like for Halloween, you're like kept behind double barriers. Halloween was just people walking on the street. There was
exactly.
I don't even know when the first year of the parade was. I have a couple of those shots in here as well. But it just you're just able to mingle and be kind of part of it, as well as observing it. And now there's in New York, the alternative pride, which is a whole separate thing. And it's just unbelievable how it's become a part of American culture. And I think this is what's also quite fantastic, that Halloween has become such a part of American culture, when it started off as just being this little thing on the streets of Christopher Street or Castro Street, as well as the drag shows. I mean, I have friends all throughout the not throughout, but in Southern Illinois. One of them is like, oh, the incredible drag shows all around here, which I think is what is sort of poking in the eye of a lot of the Republicans who are upset at this, people having fun and just going out and doing what they wanted to do. So I think it is remarkable when you look at where things were then. There was no gay marriage. It wasn't even considered. It wasn't even talked about.
Very true. Very true. No, the times have changed. Times have certainly changed. And as times change, people either grow more comfortable or people grow more fearful. And we're at that juxtaposition where both of those things are happening simultaneously. But it is good to reflect, and looking at pictures from 1979 to 1986 in black and white reminds us, and the cars and the clothing, all of the stuff, just how, in some respects, less sophisticated, less self-conscious we were then than we are now.
Well, I think it's going to prove to be a very pivotal time in gay history in terms of people coming out. And if it wasn't for AIDS, I think it would have happened a lot faster. But the reactionary climate then with Anita Bryant and everything, the huge political pushback. But I'm hopeful that it's a one-way ticket. And even though that there are these speed bumps on the road, that it's going to continue to move in the right direction. And this will be looked back at as a very important time.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I do think, though, the AIDS crisis forced the community to organize better. It allowed for greater political parity between lesbians and gay men uh, because there was no choice. And there were many things that happened in the AIDS crisis. Unfortunately, the horrible things happened, but the foundations of the LGBTQ plus community today is more based on the outcome from HIV and AIDS than it was even from the Stonewall Uprising, which has allowed the community to organize politically. It's subsequent to AIDS that people got elected to office, that we have 3 members of the United States Senate, at least 3 governors, multiple members of the House of Representatives, and representatives even from red-leaning states or red states in their legislatures, because the organization is so good, the fundraising can be so good, and the very clear sense of purpose, which doesn't necessarily exist in many other places, but this thrust, this desire for human rights and civil rights and political rights is very much alive. And I think that I would agree with you that on the other side of what we're going through now, the community will be much, much stronger, which means that policies and politics will continue to move towards a sense of justice, and not just for people within the community, but because of the community, you'll find it everywhere.
I agree, and I hope and believe that is the case. And although I must say that I am fearful for people who are in battleground states. And here, I don't think it was this year, but last year NPR ran a story about I think it was in North Dakota, a little pride gathering where all these was somehow got into the alt-right community, and all these guys showed up with automatic rifles and camo, like this was going to be some big deal. And it was actually an unbelievable story because the reporter talked to both of them, and it's scary. It's scary when people are running around with automatic rifles.
Especially people who are afraid.
Yes. Yes, and that seems to be the bottom line, stoking the fear.
Well, also, I think that when people show up armed, they are showing their own fears, because they wouldn't have shown up at all if they didn't have weapons. So guns can make very big cowards feel very brave. That is certainly dangerous, but it also is a reminder to the rest of us that these people aren't running around with guns because they are confident in who they are or their abilities. It's the gun that gives them the confidence.
Right.
And that's not confidence at all.
Right.
This is a great picture.
Thank you. Thank you. This was, one of the beaches that we would go to, that right on the edge of San Francisco. And people just do their thing.
It's just really quite interesting how he just blends right into the rocks. And being that he's not wearing anything, it's also a reminder that we are a part of nature. And we do so much to make ourselves not a part of nature.
Yes, a very, very, very natural environment. I mean, what's interesting, though, is also the way I was talking about ambiguity of photographs. You're looking here, it looks like just 3 people, but actually, if you if you pan the camera to the right, there's not necessarily hundreds, there was a lot of people that would come down to this particular beach to hang out, and a beautiful but very dramatic ocean right behind me with rocks and big waves and the like. But that was definitely a great place to spend the afternoon. So that's San Francisco, New York. This shows a little bit of the different kind of feel of the gritty city compared to the the California coast.
Yeah, you don't see as many air conditioners in San Francisco as you do in New York.
Almost none. This is right off Castro Street, I think, on 20th. I love this picture because it really has the feel of Christopher Street on a hot summer day, and people just being themselves, and the vibe of the city, and the way the sun would just streak down the streets from the west. This was Halloween on Castro Street when there was no parade. It was just people, they just walked around. This is in Christopher Street in New York. And it's another aspect of photography which I'm drawn to, is sort of a suggested narrative of, we don't really know what's going on here, but something is going on. And with they're almost like characters in a little mise-en-scene of a movie. So it's really left to the viewer's imagination to figure it out, or think about what it might be. But I love the rose just hanging there, and the pensive moment with two very contrasting people who seem to be a couple.
Opens the door to the definition of a couple.
Right. Another thing is, one question, could arise is, what is the woman with the umbrella? Why is she there? Is she just observing the parade? She just happened to be walking by? Is this a big event for her? What's her relationship to what's going on? And again, I like this ambiguity, and there's really no way to know. But contrasting that, and the guy smoking a cigar, and
and they were in front of Van Cleef and Arpels.
there you go.
It's really like a kamikaze of all different worlds happening at the same time.
So this is in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral, which I don't know for how many years it was done, but I think for a number of years it was a sit-in, because of course the Catholic Church was very, very reactionary to what was going on in the gay community at that time.
And in some cases still is.
Yes.
So it's really Rockefeller Center that you've.
Right. That is the Atlas. It is just, I guess it's just north of Rockefeller Center, like one block, but right across from the cathedral. And this was the first AIDS candlelight march in San Francisco. That was 1983. And it was just a horrible thing. This is the end of the Christopher Street Pier. As Jim Farber writes in his introduction, he compares people lounging around as if they're on the Riviera even though this pier, I think there's one more shot of it, was really just falling apart. And actually, Jim and I were just walking that area just a couple of weeks ago, and now they have this incredible, the beach that they put in, little island. I mean, the whole area is just so spiffed out, which I think makes for a little less interesting photographing. But as Jim said, as we age, we can appreciate these amenities.
Yeah, it's like the meatpacking district when I was young was filled with blood, and now it's got an Apple store.
Yeah, in a big museum. So this is the end of the pier, which is just, I mean, how the thing didn't even just fall into the water, but it's,
Parts of it did.
I guess parts of it did.
Well, what you didn't capture was the wooden part of the pier leading to this that had many boards missing, and if you didn't watch where you were going, you could fall through.
That's right. That's right. And the boat, I forget the name of the boat, the ship that was tied up there. I just loved it. It was just such a picturesque backdrop. I'm not sure even what year that was taken out. So I just thought I'd throw this in. This is a picture of me back in the day. What I may have looked like wandering around photographing. So it's a little different than I am today. But I think that's it for the pictures.
Well, that is great. I would encourage people to get the book if you are in Fort Lauderdale. It will soon be in our library and available to our members to take out. It really does capture a certain time and certain space that is nostalgic, and yet it's very clear that we can never go back. We have to keep going forward. And what was accomplished in terms of civilization then, we have to continue to fight for today, to continue to have the freedoms that we saw the people experience both in the Castro and in the village. It's not something that you can ever take for granted, that you can hold the hand or kiss the person that you love, no matter who you are, no matter where you are. And certainly your mother would have experienced that in 1940s or 1930s Germany, when you weren't allowed to go to school, you weren't allowed to work, you weren't allowed to practice your religion, you weren't allowed to do any of those things. So it's not just based on sexual orientation or your gender or any of those things. It can be based on anything.
Absolutely.
And so none of us are safe unless we work for the safety and well-being of everyone. And I think that comes out in the book. The woman holding the umbrella, the attractive young black man who was standing there in his leather jacket smoking his cigarette. You know, nobody should ever have to feel that they are othered. And I think that comes out in the book. And that's the uniqueness to some extent of photography, is that you can capture those moments, and those moments are very important.
Well, thank you very much, Robert, and thanks for having me on. And thank you for letting me photograph in the community, not to you specifically, but I do see it's a cultural movement. I mentioned a little bit earlier the way things have just entered the mainstream of American society and enriched American society in so many, in so many ways. And I'm just very happy to be walking around the city, not in the gay or LGBTQ neighborhoods, but just anywhere, and seeing same-sex people holding hands or feeling comfortable enough to do that, or just in my building, there are couples with children. It's as you said, moving forward, I think Rahal X, who wrote a little, he lived in the commune and he wrote something on the cover of the book, but it wasn't included there. But he referred it to a garden that needs continued attention, watering and care, and to make it grow. And there will be blips, but it's hopefully just moving forward from here on.
Well, there will be blips, and we know we're heading for a big blip in November. No matter what happens, there will be a blip. But I do think that, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, the arc of justice, it continues, and we always continue on that arc towards justice and liberty and freedom. It's not easy and it's always painful, but maybe it's painful so that we appreciate all the more when it happens. So thank you very much. Once again, Castro to Christopher. And I don't know. There you go. And I'm Robert Kesten, Executive Director of Stonewall National Museum, Archive, and Library. And if you are in or near the Fort Lauderdale area this Saturday, please join us at 4 o'clock for the world's first reenactment of the Stonewall Uprising. We're doing it in the afternoon because of all the activities going on, not only in Florida, but also across the country in honor of Stonewall's 55th anniversary. But please come and join us. You can throw a fake brick. There are many other things you can do. You can come into the Stonewall Inn bar that takes up a good deal of our space right now. Listen to the very music that was on that jukebox back in 1969. See a cigarette machine if you've never seen one before. It's all here. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you for your wonderful photography, and we will see you next time.